Now, this is not something that I normally like to do. I have build guides here on Maxroll, and obviously I update my YouTube channel when we have tested things in the season after we've done the theory craft. But Bone Spirit might be one of the most gear intensive builds that I've ever put together. And I just didn't have the gear to actually make it work at the levels that you may have seen it performing, even on the Maxroll ladder. The 20th position Necromancer build on the ladder right now is actually a Bone Spirit build, because this thing absolutely shreds, does insane damage. My gear is trash tier, garbage bin. We have Bone Spirit at home levels of very bad, and we're already doing 250 million damage with our Overpower procs, and you can effectively spam this once the gear gets better. But I don't have that gear, so I put together my best emulation of the types of tools that you could use to be able to make up for the differences in this gear, and I wanted to show you what the build looks like running tier 80 when you also don't have this gear, because quite honestly, I'm pretty impressed with it overall. Now, I'm currently running a very, very aggressive, lacking a ton of tankiness version of it. You can very easily swap out to including Bone Storm and more defensive aspects here than what you're currently seeing, and enjoy a much cushier ride throughout the pit, or at the least up until pit tier 100, where I think you're going to have to make these types of sacrifices and kind of just get good and get better gear. But this is the Bone Spirit Necromancer in all of its glory. While the base version of the Bone Spirit Necromancer is actually pretty good on pretty crap gear, similar to what you're looking at right now, being able to consistently put out like 50 to 100 million damage crits, and being able to very easily rely on some pretty simple to achieve gearing stats, be able to do basically all content until you're trying to push into the later tiers of the pit. But it's the addition of Banished Lord's Talisman and the fact that if you stack together enough Greater Affix maximum resource along with the Requiem aspect, which is going to give you essence per minion, you actually can very reasonably achieve the 275 essence required to be able to proc an overpowered automatic crit Bone Spirit Spirit Bomb attack on every single cast of Bone Spirit, meaning that Banished Lord's Talisman has 100% uptime of its total bonus. The benefits of the build is that it's probably one of the most satisfying builds that you can possibly play. Oddly enough, hitting an Overpower crit Bone Spirit and just smashing into massive packs of even damage resistant aura monsters and just completely deleting them is something that very few Necromancer builds get to enjoy at the rate that you get to do with this. And not only that, the gameplay that you're watching right here, I cannot stress enough, is so hyper bad that I think that we need to go to Kyovashad for you to really get a sense of just how much better it can be. And then I'm going to go ahead and go over the build, the aspects, the Paragon board. I'm going to have all this updated on Maxroll as well shortly after this video comes out. And you can use timestamps to anything that you want below. If you enjoyed what you already saw and you're excited for what you're about to see, consider subscribing to the channel. I don't want you to miss out on any Necromancer updates. And throw a like onto the video as well if by the end of this you enjoyed the build that you saw. To understand just how absolute bargain bin version of a build that you were looking at in that video, I want to show you what the build currently does when you cast Bone Spirit, and what it will do when you add on a single stat to your gear pieces, which I'm missing on every single option that's possible. But the name of the game for the Bone Spirit build is to regenerate the entirety of your Essence Orb as quickly as possible. And that gets really hard when you get up into the 200 and 300 essence range that's required to be able to trigger Banished Lord's Talisman 100% of the time. But let's go ahead and cast Bone Spirit. Let me just show you very quickly what's happening here, right? I cast Bone Spirit, it hits the target, I start generating a decent amount of essence pretty quickly, and then you'll notice that it tops off. And that's only when I have 177 essence on the build. We have Torment. Torment reads that your critical strikes with bone skills will increase your essence regeneration. Now, essence regeneration doesn't trigger off of the effect from Bone Spirit here. Essence regeneration very specifically refers to your base generation plus any essence per second that you have. Your essence regeneration is your base essence plus any multipliers that you may get from willpower, which we don't have a ton of here. And then you multiply that by how much essence generation that you have. So as you can see here, we have 11%. You take 3 base, you multiply that by 1 plus 11%, you get to 3.33. But when I crit with Bone Spirit, this number is going to increase. So all of a sudden I'm generating nearly 9 essence per second. 9 essence per second over a whopping total of 4 seconds will only get you 36 essence, which oddly enough is not enough to fully fill in our orb. But if I were to have gear with Greater aspect essence per second on the armor, on the boots, and then also have masterwork some essence onto a helmet. You'll notice just how much more quickly we're going to generate essence now that I have these stats on. And the answer is insanely fast. But you don't need greater aspect essence per second. You don't even need max roll essence per second on all of your gear, and the outcome will still be exceptionally faster than it was previously. This means that your entire essence orb can be completely full before you cast Bone Spirit again. And the gear that you were seeing me run this game on had no essence per second on the helmet, none on the armor, and none on the boots. I just wasn't lucky enough to have gear to be able to show off those stats. And I just want to very quickly highlight this before we get to anything else, because that one stat is going to make or break how good your build is at being able to spam Bone Spirit at maximum essence every time. But enough complaining about how bad my gear is. Let's go ahead and show you what your gear should look like, what your skill tree should look like, and what your Paragon should look like, so you know what to aim for this build. Keeping in mind that this is for when you want to be able to push tier 100 plus with this build, and this build is basically currently pushing tier 120. Starting off with the skill tree, just so you can have the context for the aspects that we're going to be choosing. We don't care about our generator, we just need 2 points. We do need to max out both unliving energy for the maximum essence and imperfectly balanced. Now that Bone Spirit is considered a core skill, this is actually just free damage because the increase in the cost of the skill actually doesn't apply. Bone Spirit doesn't really cost anything, it just eats all of your essence when you cast it. And there's going to be an entire bug section later on in the video, because that's going to be very important for figuring out how some of these skills interact. But just go ahead and remember that we don't really have extra costs, so resource cost reduction and this resource cost increase does not affect Bone Spirit at all. We do have Hued Flesh because we don't have any options for being able to proactively generate corpses other than Blood Mist. So even just triggering this every once in a while is going to be a huge benefit for how we have our Paragon set up. And in addition to that, just having targets for being able to hit with Corpse Tendrils for Grasping Veins. Next section, we're going to be picking up 1 point into Blood Mist, and then also picking up Blood Mist leaves behind corpses. Very important for being able to engage on monsters and having targets for Grasping Veins. A single point into Spiked Armor here, oddly enough, is going to actually trigger one of our Paragon nodes, and this is just to add on a little bit of Thorns damage to the defenders that we currently have so that they can trigger Dead Razor. If you don't want to worry about this little bit of optimization, you can absolutely put this point elsewhere if it would be more beneficial for you. Bone Prison with the ability to reduce cooldown is going to make it so that both Blood Mist and Corpse Tendrils are up more often, as well as being able to slightly help with its own cooldown, as well as Bone Spirit if you're on worse gear. If you need more essence generation, if you're running the bum kit that I was, you can always use Ghastly Bone Prison to be able to generate extra essence, just be able to close that gap until your gear gets better. Just the 1 point into Grim Harvest, as well as Fueled by Death. You're going to be triggering this by casting Raise Skeleton. You're also going to be using this to trigger Flesh Eater. And on top of that, we're going to be using Bloodgetter's aspect for more damage. So it's just going to be generally important to remember that you kind of need to spam Raise Skeleton in between casts. And once you get into the flow of it, it becomes very natural. For your curses, obviously Decrepify with the ability to every once in a while reduce cooldown from Abhorrent to Crepify. It's not the most important here. Your minions can trigger this, and sometimes lucky hits on both your Corpse Tendrils and your Bone Spirit will also trigger it. And it's gotten me out of some tight places, especially on pit bosses, when I just need Blood Mist to come up a little bit sooner, and this helped with that. Obviously, we want the points into Amplify Damage to increase damage against cursed targets, and then Death's Embrace for damage versus close enemies, as well as much needed damage reduction. Corpse Tendrils with the ability to apply Vulnerable. 3 points in Necrotic Carapace means that every single time that we generate a corpse from Lucky Hit on Hued Flesh, as well as from our Blood Mist, we're going to Fortify. Fortifying is very important for overpowering since it's going to add on additional additive damage. And on top of that, you're just going to gain damage reduction whenever you're in the fortified status. It basically helps to stop one-shots because the moment that you take damage, you lose the fortified status. But while you have it up, you will take 15% reduced damage. Obviously, we want to max out Bone Spirit as many ranks as you possibly can. And then again, we want to pick up Dreadful Bone Spirit for that maximum essence increase. There is no universe where you need the 10% crit chance from Ghastly. If you do, I would just recommend getting better gear before swapping over to Bone Spirit. This is effectively required for the build to function at this point. Just 1 point into Serration, you are absolutely crit capped without this, don't worry about it. Rapid Ossification. Now there is currently a bug where if you cast Bone Spirit, you won't reduce its own cooldown via Rapid Ossification. Again, Go to the timestamp for the bugs section to understand this better, but it is important to put these points into here because we are going to trigger it. It's just in a very roundabout way. Compound Fracture for additional damage, and then Avulsion for additional damage as well. Down to the final area, we just need the crit chance from Inspiring Leader, and then we're going to take Ossified Essence. Now, if you want additional survivability, and you're willing to give up the additional damage output that it will bring to your build, you can take these points out of Bone Prison, and you can move them down here into Bone Storm. I would highly recommend doing that if you're on lower gear or you don't have everything that I recommend here as far as stats are concerned, because you're going to want this additional damage reduction right here, and you almost certainly are going to require the critical strike chance from this. On top of that, it'll allow you to add on Shielding Storm as a defensive aspect, which will gain you additional barrier generation, which is really nice since that barrier is going to inherit damage reduction from Fortify, helping to maintain the barrier at a higher rate and just giving you a little bit more wiggle room as far as survivability is concerned. Not only that, Bone Storm is obviously like a great tool for proccing Lucky Hit chance, and then as well as proccing both Compound Fracture very quickly and the Bone Graft Legendary node. So Bone Storm for much better survivability, much better uptime, easier gearing options. Bone Prison for when you want to try hard. Now that we understand that, let's go ahead and look at the aspects in the gear and the stats that you're going to need. I already touched on this a little bit, but I'll go through it a little bit easier here. And on top of that, what you're going to see is both my best recommended Greater Affix is going to be selected on each piece of gear, and then the most valuable Masterwork crits that you could possibly get. In certain worlds, you're going to want to Masterwork crit specific stats multiple times over in the perfect version of this endgame gear. I just don't really think that it is like reasonable for you as the viewer to assume that you're going to get these types of Masterwork crits. I don't personally have them either, and I've been playing the season a lot, oddly enough. For the helmet, you need essence per second, cooldown reduction, and then maximum resource. You're going to temper on maximum life as well as crowd control duration. If you like corpse tendril size or if you like decrepify size, perfectly fine to put it there, but crowd control duration is going to make it so that you have more time to be able to set up your bone spirit damage whenever you're in a situation where you didn't one tap the pack. Whenever you trigger Raised Skeleton, it's going to get you a 21% damage multiplier, and it's just free additional damage on the defensive aspect slot here. You are going to go with maximum life in all of the gems here. You can go with intelligence for more damage, but maximum life not only gets you better survivability, but also gets you more overpower damage from your maximum life in your fortify gen. So it kind of comes out in the wash. And I think more survivability on this version of the build where we're giving up a lot of those options is probably going to do you a lot better. For the chest, plus to Macabre skills, essence per second, and then you need to have at least one roll of total armor, as well as one affix of armor here as well. And then this is where we're going to go with decrep size. I do have one decrep size and one corpse tendril size. It generally feels good. It also helps the build to feel better when you're taking it outside of the pit, where you don't basically like melee fight every single pack down. And it's going to make things like Helltide and running normal dungeons just a bit smoother. Obviously, we're going to put Hardened Bones here for a huge amount of DR, and then more rubies. For the gloves, plus ranks to core skills, critical strike chance, and then intelligence, we want to temper on bone spirit damage, as well as either crowd control duration or corpse tendril size. This is where you're going to put Serration as a big multiplier of our overall damage. And then here's where we're using Blood Moon Breaches. Please do not forget that this is an Overpower build, and Blood Moon Breaches say the moment that you curse a target, you do an additional 70% damage to them. On top of that, it's going to get you additional ranks to your curse skills, which is going to further decrease monster damage and speed on Decrepify, as well as ranks to amplify damage for even more damage multiplication. On top of that, you get maximum life, which is great for Overpower, and then a special damage reduction to cursed targets. The minions have a 7% chance to curse targets. Does mean that they also apply Iron Maiden to monsters every once in a while, and they help with Decrepify uptime. I don't think that that's like so important that you need to worry about it, but it is cool to see Iron Maiden proc on those monsters every once in a while. For the boots, movement speed, essence per second, and then ranks to bone spirit. We want to temper on additional movement speed and then crowd control duration. And here's where we're putting occult. Yes, the 2 additional skeletal warriors are going to be important. That's a total of 14 essence on your boot slot, where we don't really have another option for additional damage that we could easily slot on here. For your weapon, you want to go with a sword. It has the highest damage bonus, as well as having that little bit of additive crit damage. If you like life on kill, you can use a scythe. They have the same base damage. It's not really important which one of these 2 that you use, but you want to get intelligence. I'm going with maximum life and then crit damage. Can you put overpower damage here? Yes. Will you sometimes mess up and not overpower in every single hit? Also yes. The difference between crit damage and overpower damage here, I think, is a difference of 10 additive damage on just the base roll. So I don't think it's super important, but yes, you could put overpower damage here. We're going to go with Bone Spirit Explosion Size, which is obviously really nice. If you are using Bone Storm, you could also use Bone Storm Duration for even more survivability and uptime, and then obviously also tempering on Bone Spirit damage itself. Here's where we're going to be putting Grasping Veins for a huge amount of our crit chance and a massive multiplier against targets once we apply Grasping Veins or Corpse Tendrils to them. And then on top of that, and I know I just kind of said this interestingly enough, but we are going with rubies in here for overpower damage. They are more than twice as effective as emeralds for crit damage. And I think that if you have the build fully functional, you should expect to overpower at least like 95+% of the time. And if you take that into consideration for how often you're applying it, then the bonus here is worth the difference. For the additive on the weapon, a little bit less important. For the gem itself, very important. For the amulet, Banished Lord's Talisman is the thing that fully makes this build possible in this version of it. If you weren't using Overpower 1, you should just be checking out the leveling section of the build guide and the variant there, because it's going to look a lot different. But what you want to keep in mind is that your gear needs to be able to support the Banished Lord's Talisman version in the endgame, because it's just strictly better. For our rings, we want intelligence, critical strike chance, and then I went with critical strike damage here again, bone spirit damage for the temper, and then casting a macabre skill will restore essence. This is going to happen after you cast bone spirit, obviously, and you're going to get a huge amount of just flat essence right off the top, and then you're going to get that percentage regen based off your essence per second. So this is a huge additional benefit. You want to hit these as high as possible on your temper. Even a minimum roll temper will function like you saw in the video, but you definitely want to max this out. And this is where we're putting Torment, like I said previously, for a huge amount of a multiplier for our essence per second and our base essence regen. The second ring is going to look a lot like the first ring, except here's where we're putting Requiem for that 7 essence per active minion that's currently alive. It's not how many minions you could have, it's how many minions you currently have. I have a single skull in here because I think with 2 diamonds and a skull, you'll be able to hit all of your armor requirements and all of your res requirements. If you don't need the armor, like if you've got an insane roll or a greater affix armor roll here, you would just swap this over to a diamond as well. There's nothing else to really put into the jewelry at this point. Most necromancers are going to be both armor and res capped, even without worrying about their jewelry. For the offhand, and this is basically the entire reason why we're using an offhand in the first place. You can only get maximum resource on your offhand and on your helmet. That's why we're not using Shaco. That's why we're not using a 2-hander. So here we want maximum resource, cooldown reduction, and crit chance. You're going to put on more Bone Spirit Explosion Size or Bone Storm Duration if you're using that skill, then more Bone Spirit damage. Then here's where I'm currently using Swelling Curse. Swelling Curse is really nice because it says you just have 25% crit chance with Bone Spirit. And then on top of that, whenever you hit a pack of monsters, you'll gain more maximum essence. What this basically means is when you're walking into a boss fight, you want to try to hit the biggest group possible, get the most maximum essence possible, walk into the boss fight, and then hit them with the biggest spirit bomb that you possibly can. That being said, in the endgame, you are at 100% crit chance without Swelling Curse, as long as you have cast Corpse Tendrils at all, just based off the 25% here and the rest of the stats that you have. So you can absolutely swap out Swelling Curse for either Conceited if you're using Bone Storm with Barrier for an additional multiplier there. You can also just use Edge Masters for a 20% damage multiplier. There are a couple different options that you could use here. You can even go with critting on a core skill will get you attack speed, just so that like your minions swing a little bit faster. It's a little bit of a float slot. Obviously you want to put in the biggest damage multiplier that you possibly can, but until you have near perfect gear, Swelling Curse is going to do you just fine. For the actual minions in the Book of the Dead, we're going to be using Defenders Take Reduced Damage. It's basically the only way for them to survive high enough levels in the pit without having to invest in their survivability. You're going to sacrifice Bone Mages for the huge Overpower multiplier, and then Iron Golem for the huge Critical Strike damage multiplier. I was trying to think of the best way to structure the rest of the video because 1, I want to show you the Paragon, 2, I want to show you bugs, and 3, I want to talk about gameplay and skill rotation. Let's just start with the Paragon for people who just like need to see that very quickly. Again, it's all in the planner. You don't have to pause the video or anything like that. But in the starter board, we're going with Amplify. You would pick up Preservation if you need additional armor. If not, you could save 1 point and put the 2 points here to hit that intelligence requirement. Moving up into Bone Graft, this is where we're going to be putting Corporeal. Corporeal will get you just a little bit of additional additive from bone damage and resistances here, get you another 1.1 multi. Then we're going to be building up into Reinvigorate. We don't really need any of this essence on kill. Make sure to pick up Tenacity for that additional maximum life. Then obviously Bone Graft. You'll notice that on Entomb, which will give us crit chance, I'm not then building up over into like the Bone Critical Strike damage over here. This is 2 points for 7 additive damage. Do not be tempted by this. It is absolutely a waste of your time. Building into the third board for Flesh Eater, we're currently using Gravekeeper. This is if you can actually maintain high enough uptime on corpses to get the biggest bonus out of it. If you wanted to, you could also make this control and then just make sure to basically move these points around, the ones that are in Dex, over to intelligence to hit that requirement. And then what control will do will get you a huge multiplier against packs that you're fighting. And then in those two instances where you manage to actually stagger the boss, you'd have a 1.2 multi as well as a little bit more additive damage. I'm not quite settled on which one of these two I think is best. In the endgame version of the build, if I can have enough corpses, I think having the 12% up just all of the time will probably end up functioning better, but I wouldn't be surprised if control ends up winning out in the meta. Obviously, we want to pick up Flesh Eater here. Again, you're going to be triggering this from Raised Skeleton. Then after that, you actually want to path over into your fourth board here in Bloodbath. Bloodbath is where we're putting Essence, a minimum investment for Essence here. You do not need any more additive damage. You have like you have almost 1,500 additive damage on Bone Spirit alone. And then whenever you overpower, you're going to gain a huge amount of additional additive damage there, probably like another 1,000 to 2,000. So don't think that putting in a point just to get 20 additive damage here is going to outperform getting these points into further pieces of your Paragon for more maximum life. To that point, we're going to be pathing through Thick Hide for the additional maximum life here, and obviously picking up the multiplier for Overpower damage. Scent of Death being at the 5th board slot doesn't really matter. You're not going to be hitting any of the requirements for the rare nodes anymore. Do not worry about them. But here's where we're going to be picking up additional maximum life, obviously the legendary node for Scent of Death, and then we're going to be putting in Dominate. Again, we don't care about the additive damage here. We just care about the fact that after you overpower an enemy, they're going to take an additional 12% damage from you for the next 5 seconds. You should be permanently overpowering. So this is just a free 12% multi after you hit them the first time. Here's where you're probably going to start seeing some differences between how I'm currently building it and what other people might be recommending. In Cult Leader, Cult Leader is just a great board to be able to put in an intelligence glyph to very efficiently hit a minimum requirement for it. But I really like Dead Razor. What Dead Razor is going to offer you is additional damage reduction for our minions here, which is just like nice, right? It's good. If you're using the Reaper skeletons, because you can't actually afford to only use the defenders at this point for corpses and cooldown reduction, Dead Razor is going to help them to survive significantly better. But the cool part about it is whenever your minions deal damage to an enemy, that enemy is going to take additional damage from you and your minions up to a 15% damage multiplier. And since we're using defenders, not only that, with that cheeky little tech that I showed you, but triggering just a little bit of Thorns damage very quickly, you should have permanent uptime on this multiplier, and it outperforms the vast majority of any other multiplier that you can get, but it comes at the cost of needing to use minions, which luckily we get to do. Then you'll notice we just had a couple additional points over here. I'm going to path over into Blood Begets Blood just to pick up another maximum life node here. Do not sleep on maximum life nodes. 1, just for your general survivability, but 2, more overpower damage, more fortify overpower damage. It's just better for survivability, better for damage. Hard to argue with that. Let's go ahead and throw up just some more gameplay here, and we'll talk about skill rotation. Now, the general idea of the build is that you need to maintain a few key buffs. Flesh Eater and Fueled by Death, meaning you need to click Raise Skeleton whenever possible. Just make sure that you have 100% uptime on that. This will also be triggering your Blood Getters. And not only that, it's going to be making sure to just like keep your minions healthier for longer. While maintaining these buffs, we want to make sure to be casting Bone Spirit whenever we have at least 275 maximum essence, so that it will overpower and trigger the next skill to overpower as well. Because of that, making sure that you have this essence uptime becomes the key feature of how the build works. Starting off, you just cast Bone Spirit at an enemy. You should already have it procced. You also just want to get it out there to kill a couple of the trash monsters so that you can trigger your corpse tendrils to not only gain that crit chance, but also pull everything in. Going to make it a lot easier to apply your Bone Spirit damage, and then also apply a huge multiplier to them. Make sure to curse as well. Obviously, this will activate a ton of things in your build, but not only will it activate your defenders to go start attacking, but also just make monsters much safer to deal with. After the curse is up, you cast Bone Spirit again. Now you're going to look over what's left and kind of determine what your next steps are. To very quickly help with resource generation, if you're using it that way, you're also going to go ahead and just preactively cast Bone Prison whenever it's up. If you have Bone Prison up, go ahead and cast it. It's going to interfere with monsters' AI. It's going to generate you essence or reduce your cooldowns if that's relevant for what you're doing. And it's going to give you a ton of additional maximum essence since each segment of Bone Prison counts as a minion. So not only is Bone Prison just good for everything else that I said, It's also going to apply Vulnerable as a really good source of that as well, on top of your Corpse Tendrils to make sure that you have 100% uptime. But it also leads to you doing the most damage possible, since all of our damage multipliers come from our maximum essence. Then you kind of fall into this pattern of rinse and repeat. Go ahead and initiate the fight with a curse, toss in your Bone Spirit, use Bone Prison to reduce cooldown, and then also hit Corpse Tendrils. Once you have enough essence to be able to cast again, or Bone Spirit just came off of cooldown, cast it again, make sure to hit Raise Skeleton a couple times, rinse and repeat. Blood Mist is your oh no button in case you ever need to proactively generate corpses, in case your minions have died, something has gone terribly wrong, or things are charging you down so that you have a target for Corpse Tendrils to be able to wrangle everything back in. But on top of that, just avoid the massive amount of AoE damage, poison damage, damage over time, and the one-shot hits from the pit bosses themselves. Do not be afraid to Blood Mist through a pack of monsters, because that will help to drag your minions behind you, getting them to initiate in the fight, and generally get them all preoccupied, so you can drop down Bone Prison for cooldown, a little bit of Essence Gen if you're using it that way, recast Bone Spirit, reapply your corpse, etc., etc. Now let's go ahead and talk about the bugs with the build, because they are numerous and interesting. The first one being Rapid Ossification, which I kind of hinted at earlier. Rapid Ossification says every 100 essence that you spend will reduce the cooldowns of your bone skills. And before season 4, that meant that when you cast Bone Spirit, this would trigger. Now, looking at Bone Spirit, I currently have a 9.46 second cooldown. And on top of that, when I crit, I'll reduce that cooldown by 7 seconds. That means that if I were to stand right next to this test dummy and cast Bone Spirit and successfully crit, you would expect me to reduce it down to 2.46 seconds. And then because I currently have at least 100 essence here, and now keep in mind it actually counts all of the essence. It's not just looking at if 100 was spent. It actually counts all of the essence spent for this purpose. But you would expect it to at least reduce my cooldown by 1.5 seconds sooner, meaning that I should already be at less than a 1 second cooldown for this skill. Let's see what happens when I cast Bone Spirit. I crit, and I'm at an over 2 second cooldown for Bone Spirit. If you were to math it out, it would actually be 2.46 seconds. Now, that's not how that's supposed to work, and it's absolutely a bug. The interesting part here is in how these things are currently triggering off of one another, and the fact that not only can we actually get that Rapid Ossification to proc with a little bit of ingenuity, but also it's bugged and we can actually get a double proc off of it. So let me go ahead and show you that. If I were to cast Bone Spirit in a direction where it won't crit at all, we have a large cooldown. If I were to then cast Decrepify, watch this cooldown very quickly, you'll notice that it dropped by 2 seconds when I cast Decrepify. Why? Well, I didn't trigger Decrepify's cooldown reduction here, and in fact, I can kind of show you that again. Let me get to 100 essence, cast it out here, and again, look at this cooldown, and oh, got it to drop by 2 seconds. Interestingly enough, when Bone Prison's essence cost, which says all remaining essence, consumes your entire essence globe, it doesn't count as a triggered spending of essence. That's why it's not working when you cast the skill itself. But we have spent all of that essence, and Rapid Ossification is waiting for us to trigger a spend essence event. That's why I can then cast Decrepify, which costs a little bit of essence, and get my cooldown reduction. So to modify that gameplay loop just a little bit that I just described, you'll notice that I'm casting Decrepify in between each Bone Spirit cast, even though the curse is currently applied, and it's to trigger Rapid Ossification. This would work with any expenditure, so if you cast like Blade or Bone Spear or something like that, it would work this way too. But for us, the only thing that we have to cast that actually costs essence is Decrepify, and that's why we're using it in that way. Now here's the interesting part about everything that I just said. Consuming all of your essence with Bone Spirit for Rapid Ossification does reduce the cooldown of other bone skills. So I'll go ahead and cast Bone Prison, and then I'll cast Bone Spirit. Watch the cooldown here. You'll notice that it reduces again by just about 2 seconds. Now here's the fun part. When I cast Decrepify, it triggers again. All right, let me just go ahead and show you that in real time one more time now that you've seen it, so you can better grok what I'm about to explain to you. Casting Bone Prison puts it onto cooldown. Casting Bone Spirit triggers Rapid Ossification from my other bone skills, and then triggering a expenditure of essence will trigger it again for Bone Prison, and will also trigger it for Bone Spirit. This will also work for Bone Storm if you're using it there as well. So in a world where you want to maximize cooldown, you would have Bone Prison already up on a target. You would Bone Spirit into them for the first trigger, and then you would Decrep for the second trigger. You'll notice that our Bone Spirit is now off cooldown because we are actually getting the total amount of cooldown reduction that we would expect with this a little bit of an additional step. And then Bone Spirit will be off of cooldown shortly thereafter. So Bone Prison, Bone Spirit, Decrepify, Bone Spirit, Decrepify, Bone Spirit, Decrepify, Bone Prison. With enough cooldown reduction, enough essence per second, and enough points in rapid ossification and maximum essence, what this basically means is that Bone Prison into Bone Spirit and then Decrep will completely reset Bone Prison right off the mark, or only requires an additional cast of Bone Spirit, so you can basically spam Bone Prison the entire time. Now for the second interesting bug. We are currently using Requiem. Requiem says that we gain maximum essence per active minion. It has long been understood that Bone Prison are considered minions, and if you were to look at my maximum essence right now, I have 173. I cast Bone Prison. I now have 209 because there are 6 sections of my Bone Prison. But there's a little bit of an interesting holdover from casting Bone Prison. So let me go ahead and take off Requiem again. Put Requiem back on. I currently have 173 maximum essence. I cast Bone Prison. I gain 6 times 6, which is 36. Now, the sharp-eyed people here are going to notice that this looks a little bit higher than that. Now my maximum essence is just permanently 6 higher. As long as you don't load out of whatever area you're in, or as long as you don't take off the Requiem aspect, after you cast Bone Prison, you are permanently considered to have 1 more active minion for the purposes of Requiem, gaining you 1 more minion's worth of essence. In the perfect endgame version of the build, you will absolutely abuse this to be able to hit the minimum essence requirement for triggering Banished Lord's Talisman, but that's just something to be aware of. If the build seems to be working a little bit different on the first cast versus casts after, that is why. There you go. That's the end of the build guide. This one's a little bit longer. I'm trying to include more gameplay as well as more like skill rotation and tips and tricks. That's something that's been requested in the comments down below. So I hope it didn't disincentivize you from watching more of the video. I hope it was beneficial for you. Let me know if you did appreciate it, because that'll help me just to tailor my build guides better in the upcoming videos that you're going to be seeing. And if people want it, I'm more than willing to put in the time and effort to make sure to cover it, because I do think that that's something that generally gets lost in the sauce. It's kind of hard to explain to people, like, how do you exactly play the build? And you can't expect that everybody has either like the same skill level, the acumen, or understanding of what it's all meant to do together. So again, let me know down in the comments. Just my last shilling, subscribe to the channel if you're new here, toss a like onto the video. That's it for me. Thank you so much for watching this video. I truly hope that helps. And as always, I look forward to seeing you in the next one.